special broadcast, continuing with a big focus on the India Revival Mission. We have a very special guest joining us. Viewers, we are counting it down to live post May 3rd. Hopefully, for most parts of this country, things will improve a little, if not for the red zones and containment zones. But outside of that, we are expecting government to announce some amount of relaxation. The big focus still has to be restarting the economy. The big focus has to be how do we get our businesses going again? How do we ensure that livelihood becomes priority one more time? So let's say good evening to Mr. Pawan Goenka of Mahindra and Mahindra Group joining us right now. Mr. Goenka, when we started off this campaign, it was more about asking people whether they believe it is now time to open up the economy. Now, we're all, just 2 days away from May 3rd. We are hoping that there will be some amount of relaxations. But where do you see this beginning from? How do we begin to restarting our growth?
Well, clearly, the government is weighing very carefully the opening versus not opening. There is fairly good control that has happened, but I do not know whether we will have everything opened up completely from 4th of May. But we do expect that certain areas will open up in the non-containment zones and some business will start. So let me first say that after 20th April opening up in essential services and some of the other expansion in non-containment zone, the tractor dealerships have opened up in many areas. And for Mahindra, 35-40% and maybe even more tractor dealerships are open. And the tractor deliveries have started in the last 10 days of the month of April. Of course, right now numbers are very small, but it's good to see that the customers are coming back. The customers are putting in order and they're looking to buy tractors clearly because they're preparing for the Kharif season and starting the land preparation and sowing. So that's a good sign. We had some small amount of billing wholesale also in the month of April of tractors from our finished good inventory. Of course, we have not started any of our plants right now. In automotive, as you would have seen that the billing from OEMs to dealers has been zero for almost all OEMs. I haven't seen anyone reporting any wholesale in the month of April. And we do expect that after 3rd of May, even though plants may take somewhat longer to get started, but I would expect that dealerships will open up in the non-containment zone. And therefore, the inventory that the dealers have, the inventory that the OEMs have of finished good inventory before the lockdown, we will start consuming that and start selling those vehicles to the consumers. What is good right now, encouraging sign is that in tractor, obviously I said that there appears to be a good demand pull that will happen once everything opens up, and the month of May should not be too bad. Of course, it won't be like a regular month of May, but we may get back to half or more of our regular sales. And then if the plants start operating somewhere around middle of May to end of May, then I think June may become a normal month for tractors. For automotive, we would expect that in the month of May, we will start consuming our finished good inventory. And again, if we can start production towards the end of May, we may start seeing some sales happening in June also. Fortunately, right now we see that there is a positive sign on small commercial vehicle demand, which appears to be the one that most customers appear to be looking to buy, whereas the heavy commercial vehicle and the passenger vehicle, personal vehicle, may take some more time.
Okay, so you're saying that for tractors, you are seeing some amount of demand for, there's also some amount of interest coming in for small commercial vehicles. But before we talk a little bit more about this, Mr. Goenka, everybody knows that the auto industry itself, passenger as well as commercial, was going through a tough time even before Corona hit us. And then now we've had almost 6 weeks of absolutely no activity. Where does the industry stand now in terms of impact, in terms of employment and business revenues?
Well, the auto industry is fairly complex in the sense that we have suppliers on one side, as many as 800,000 suppliers for an OEM. We have dealers on the other side. A company like Mahindra has almost 1,000 dealer points in automotive business. And we have obviously our own plants, our own workers. And therefore, we have to look at each one of these stakeholders differently. For the dealers to be able to continue to pay their fixed cost, which primarily are wages to the employees, without having any revenue is a fairly difficult task, because most dealers are small businesses, relatively small businesses. I don't know if they can continue to pay the wages in the month of May and forward if the business does not restart. For dealers, therefore, the biggest concern right now will be to get the working capital, to get the loan from the bank as they restart the operation. For the suppliers, on the other hand, the migrant workers may be the biggest concern, because many of the suppliers use migrant workers, contract workers who may have gone back, and it will be difficult to get them back to work. But other concern that the industry would have is that we cannot just open our plant. For our plant to become operational, the suppliers who are spread almost all over India will also have to become operational. And therefore, a partial opening may not do much to get the plants restarted. And what we need is a full opening. I know that it probably will not be possible on 4th of May. It's okay to take another week or so, but whenever we are ready, we need to start the full sort of country open up, except of course for hot spots that are there, which will have to be shut down. So it will take the suppliers, the OEMs, the dealers, and obviously none of this can work without customers coming back. All four have to come together for the industry to start functioning. And our expectation is that from the time that we have full opening up, it probably will take about 2 months for the industry to come back to normal.
All right, and you mentioned the customers, and whenever the customers are coming in, and that's extremely important. Fact of the matter also is, even if you look at the list released today by the central government, grading different districts and cities, the biggest of your cities, all of your state capitals and other metros are all in red zone currently, which means that it's going to take at least a few weeks for any kind of opening up of markets in these places. Does that further dampen your hopes, because all then you are left with is primarily the small town and the rural demand?
Well, it will probably be different for different companies. For Mahindra, we have fairly large penetration in rural India, and 100% of our tractor sales, of course, and 50% plus of our automotive sales come from rural India, and therefore, to some extent, we are less dependent than maybe some others on state capitals. Of course, state capital do have a fairly big chunk of the overall business, but rural is not small for us. And even if the rural opens fully and we get 50% of our business back, and maybe half of the urban business back, that's not bad for the next 2 or 3 months. Because as I said earlier, that it's going to take some time for the plants also to come to full capacity. And it's not like from day one, we can go back to 100% capacity. Keep in mind that we have to be very careful about safety of our employees. We have to be very careful about social distancing. And therefore, the capacity of the plant cannot be what it was before the lockdown. We'll probably start with 25%, go up to 50%, and then 75%, and so on. And that process will take some time. So I'm not so concerned about having supply and not having demand, because the demand also will take some time and supply also will take some time. And hopefully both of those will come together and match up. Mm-hmm. But the important thing is that everything has to start. It cannot be just one part.
Right.
Yes, please go ahead. No, so I was saying that everything has to start.
No, so I was actually going to ask you. Yes, okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Go ahead, I'm done.
Okay, now I was going to ask you, this is a company-specific question, because different companies are dealing with this situation differently, basis their own set of challenges. But the biggest of the corporates have now begun to look at different ways of saving costs. We had Reliance Industries yesterday announce, salary cuts. Mr. Ambani himself will not be taking the compensation. How is the Mahindra Group managing its finances at this point of time?
Well, one thing that is good for Mahindra Group is that we have been always had a strong balance sheet. And given that we had a strong balance sheet, we had some war chest available. And we were also able to go out in the market and borrow more money to be able to manage the current situation of no revenue and yet having fixed expenses. And as you must be aware that we have raised NCDs 2,000 crore plus to take care of our requirements for the next 2 or 3 months. And therefore, while obviously without revenue, business in terms of P&L, profit and loss is suffering, but at least we have sufficient funds available to be able to take care of our requirements during this lockdown, and fairly well covered. But the good thing also is that, as I said earlier, that the tractor sales have started, the money has started coming in, and therefore, though slow, though just the beginning few days, but the cash cycle is beginning to start rotating. And once that rotation comes back, it's going to take time, but when it comes back, I think we'll be back into business. I cannot say right now exactly when, but my best guess will be that 2 to 3 months from complete opening of lockdown is when we'll get back to full capacity.
Okay, but are you seeing a worse impact, on players within the industry? Your dealers, your suppliers and vendors, smaller businesses. Are they beginning to consider the possibility of shutdown, of larger number of layoffs and job losses?
Well, I think it will obviously depend on the size of the business. The larger businesses, the larger suppliers, the larger dealers would probably be able to take the current problem for much longer than the smaller ones. And there is a risk, as the dealer association has talked about, there is a risk that 10-15% dealers may not be able to manage the shutdown and will have to perhaps pull down the shutters. But it really all depends on how well managed the dealers were. And in a time like this, whether it's a slowdown or an extreme situation of COVID-19, in a time like this, one realizes that having a strong balance sheet, no matter which business you are in, becomes the paramount important thing when there is a loss of revenue and a loss of cash cycle that sort of stops. So I would expect some auto dealerships, smaller ones, the ones that are not very well managed, may be in trouble. But it will not be a large impact on the industry because the larger dealers are fairly well covered. On the supplier side, tier ones, the ones that directly supply to OEMs, probably will manage the crisis. But on the tier 2 and tier 3, again, the ones who are not well managed in terms of cash cycle may have some problem. And that's why it's very important the government of India focuses on the working capital for MSMEs, who are the smaller dealers who supply to the larger dealers. Focus on working capital. I think that's the biggest concern that one would have on survival of the small and medium-sized suppliers and dealers.
Well, from our conversations as well, it seems like that is on top of the mind for most, government officials, and hopefully we will be hearing something soon, at least for the MSMEs. Mr. Goenka, it's been a while, but it's always a pleasure to have a conversation with you. Thank you so much for joining us here on Mirror Now.